My daughter looked me straight in the eye and said I couldn't sit at my own Father's Day dinner unless I signed my house over to her. Right there, in front of my other daughter, Jenny, my grandson, Nathan, and 3 neighbors. She slammed legal documents onto the table and pushed my plate away. "We're tired of your selfishness, Dad. Sign these papers or find somewhere else to celebrate." The whole table went silent. Everyone stared at their food. Nobody defended me. I'm Edward Sullivan, 72 years old, and I taught high school English for 38 years. I thought I'd raised my Irene to be better than this. But as I sat there, humiliated and dismissed, I realized something important. She had no idea what she'd just set in motion. 3 days later, she'd learn exactly what happens when you try to steal from someone who plans ahead. But before I tell you what happened next, let me know in the comments. Have you ever had a family member try to take advantage of your kindness? And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about standing up to family manipulation. Let me take you back to when Irene was 8 years old. My wife Margaret had just passed away from cancer, and it was just the 2 of us in that big house on Maple Street. Irene was brilliant even then. She could read at a high school level and had this way of getting exactly what she wanted. Looking back, maybe I should have seen the warning signs. "Daddy," she'd say, wrapping her little arms around my neck, "when I grow up, will you give me everything?" And I'd laugh and say, "Everything I have will be yours someday, sweetheart." I meant it, every word. I worked double shifts tutoring students just to keep us afloat. Irene never wanted for anything. Piano lessons, dance classes, summer camps, whatever she asked for, I found a way. When she was 16 and wanted a car, I took out a second mortgage. When she cried about not having designer clothes like her friends, I used my credit card. But there were moments, little things that made my stomach tighten. The way she'd manipulate other kids to get their toys, how she'd cry if she didn't get her way, then turn it off like a switch when I gave in. Margaret used to say, "Eddie, that child needs boundaries." But I was so tired from grieving and working that giving in was easier. I thought love meant saying yes to everything. Irene graduated valedictorian and got accepted to law school. The tuition was $45,000 a year. I had exactly $8,200 in my savings account. So I did what any father would do. I cashed out my retirement fund early, paid the penalty, and handed her a check for the full amount. "You're the best dad in the world," she said, hugging me tight. "I'm going to make you so proud." And she did. Irene graduated summa cum laude, passed the bar exam on her first try, and landed a job at a prestigious firm downtown. For a while, things were good. She'd call every Sunday, visit for holidays, and always told everyone how much she appreciated her father. But then she met Trevor. Trevor was charming, I'll give him that. Smooth talker with big dreams about starting his own consulting business. Irene was completely smitten. They got married after dating for 8 months, and suddenly my Sunday calls became monthly calls. Holiday visits became, "We're too busy this year." Around that time, I started having health scares. Nothing serious, but enough to make me think about the future. My lawyer, Harold Davidson, suggested I set up a family trust instead of a simple will. "It protects your assets," he said, "especially if you're worried about your daughter's spending habits or her husband's business ventures." I didn't think much about it then. The paperwork was complicated, full of legal terms I didn't understand completely, but I signed it anyway. The first time Irene asked for money after her wedding, it was for a small emergency. Their apartment had flooded, and they needed $3,000 for temporary housing. I wrote the check without hesitation. What father wouldn't help? But the emergencies kept coming. Trevor's business needed a loan for equipment. Irene's car broke down. Their credit cards were maxed out from the wedding. Each time she'd call with that same sweet voice from her childhood, "Daddy, I hate to ask, but..." I started noticing things during their visits. Irene would walk through my house differently, touching furniture, commenting on how much space I didn't need. She'd mention articles she'd read about elderly people falling downstairs or forgetting to turn off the stove. Always with concern in her voice, but something felt off. Then Nathan called me one evening. My grandson was 19, a sophomore at the local college, and he'd always been close to me. But this conversation was different. "Grandpa," he said, his voice low like he was afraid of being overheard. "Mom and Dad have been fighting about money again. I heard Mom say something about you being too stubborn
and how she deserves to inherit now while she's young enough to enjoy it. My chest went cold. What else did she say, Nathan? She said you were being selfish by living in such a big house when you could just move to a retirement community. That phone call with Nathan changed everything. I realized I needed to understand exactly what legal protections I had. So the next morning I called Harold Davidson, the lawyer who'd helped me set up the family trust 12 years earlier. "Eddie," Harold said when I explained my concerns, "I'm glad you called. Let me remind you about some provisions we included specifically for this type of situation."
He pulled out my trust documents and walked me through them section by section. The house wasn't technically mine to give away. It belonged to the family trust, and I was the trustee. But here was the part I'd forgotten. Section 8.3. This clause, Harold explained, protects you if a beneficiary acts against your interests. If Irene attempts to coerce, manipulate, or abuse you financially, she forfeits her inheritance rights. I felt my heart start racing. What qualifies as acting against my interests? Identity theft, elder abuse, coercion, attempting to force you out of your home, any behavior that exploits your age or relationship with her for financial gain. Harold also reminded me that when Nathan turned 21 in 2 years, he'd become the primary beneficiary if Irene was disqualified. It was something Margaret and I had included to skip a generation if our children proved irresponsible. "Do you have any evidence of financial manipulation?" Harold asked. I thought about all those emergency loans, the comments about my house, Nathan's phone call, but there was something else bothering me. Mail had been delivered to my address with Irene's name on it. "Harold," I said, "I think I need to check my credit report." 3 days later, I sat in Harold's office staring at my credit report. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the papers. There, in black and white, were 4 credit cards I'd never applied for, all in my name, all at my address, all with Irene listed as an authorized user. The total debt was $38,500. "This is identity theft," Harold said quietly. "She's been using your name and credit for months, maybe longer." I thought about Irene's recent visits, how she'd always asked to check my mail, how she'd offered to help organize my financial papers. She'd been stealing from me systematically, using her legal knowledge to cover her tracks. But the credit cards were just the beginning. Harold ran a more detailed background check and found loan applications submitted online using my Social Security number. Trevor's failing consulting business had been propped up with debt taken out in my name. "Eddie, you need to understand something," Harold said. "This isn't just about money. Irene has been positioning herself to take control of your assets by making you financially dependent on her. It's a common elder abuse tactic." My neighbor Rita Morrison had mentioned seeing strange cars in my driveway when I wasn't home, people with clipboards checking the property. Now I understood. Irene had been having the house appraised, probably planning to pressure me into a reverse mortgage or sale. But there was something else. Harold pulled out a manila folder marked Bennett Financial Records. "I did some digging," he said. "Trevor's gambling debts are much worse than you know. They owe money to some very serious people." Suddenly, Irene's urgency made perfect sense. The evidence was overwhelming. Irene had been conducting what Harold called a systematic financial exploitation campaign. She'd used my good credit to fund Trevor's gambling habits and her own shopping addiction. Every emergency loan had been calculated to keep me financially stressed while she built up debt in my name. But the worst part wasn't the money. It was the gaslighting. When I confronted Irene about the credit cards during her next visit, she looked me straight in the face and said, "Dad, we discussed this months ago. You offered to help us with credit building, remember? You're getting forgetful." She said it with such confidence, such concern in her voice, that for a moment I almost believed her. Almost. "Irene, I never agreed to this. Dad, you're 72. It's normal to forget conversations. That's why Trevor and I think it might be time to discuss your living situation. This big house is too much for you." The manipulation was so smooth, so practiced. She was using my age against me, making me question my own memory. Classic abuser behavior. But I had kept every receipt, every bank statement, every document. Harold had taught me to preserve evidence, and Irene didn't know about the folder I'd been building. "I want you to leave," I said quietly. Irene's concerned expression cracked for just a second, revealing something cold underneath. Dad, we're only trying to help. Maybe we should talk about power of attorney, just in case you start getting more confused. After she left, I sat in my kitchen staring at a stack of bills I couldn't afford. Bills created by my own daughter to trap me into dependence on her. But she had miscalculated. Irene's pressure campaign intensified after our confrontation about the credit cards. She started bringing experts to my house uninvited. First, it was a financial planner, actually just Trevor's friend from his old insurance job, who talked about tax benefits of transferring property to younger family members. "Mr. Sullivan," this fake expert said, spreading papers across my kitchen table, "at your age, estate planning becomes critical. If you transfer the house to Irene now, you'll avoid probate costs and estate taxes." Everything he said was either wrong or deliberately misleading. I'd taught critical thinking for 38 years. I could spot a con job. But Irene nodded along like he was some kind of genius. "Dad, this makes so much sense," she said. "We're not trying to take anything from you. We just want to protect your assets." The second expert was supposedly a real estate agent who claimed my neighborhood was declining. "Properties like this are hard to maintain for seniors," she said. "Have you considered a nice retirement community?" I started recording these conversations on my phone. Harold had suggested it, and Virginia is a one-party consent state. Irene didn't know that every word of her manipulation campaign was being preserved as evidence. But what really opened my eyes was a conversation I overheard between Irene and Trevor in my backyard. They thought I was napping, but I was standing at my bedroom window. "The stubborn old man won't sign," Irene hissed. "We need that house money now, or Tony's guys are going to break Trevor's legs." That's when Nathan showed me Trevor's gambling records. My grandson had been quietly documenting his father's addiction for months, worried about how it was affecting his mother. The records were devastating. Trevor owed $125,000 to various bookies and loan sharks. He'd lost the family's savings on sports betting and online poker. Irene's law practice was failing because she'd been using client retainer money to pay Trevor's debts, a serious ethics violation that could get her disbarred. "Grandpa," Nathan said, handing me a folder full of bank statements and betting receipts, "they're planning to use your house as collateral for a loan to pay off Dad's debts. Mom thinks if she can get you declared mentally incompetent, she can take over your finances." My blood went cold. "What do you mean, declared incompetent?" "She's been documenting things, taking pictures of your medicine cabinet, writing down times when you repeat stories or forget names. She's building a case that you're developing dementia." I thought about all those recent visits, how Irene would ask me the same questions repeatedly, then act concerned when I gave slightly different answers, how she'd help by organizing my pills, then express worry about my ability to manage medications. She was creating evidence of my supposed incompetence. But Irene had made a critical error. She assumed I was just a harmless old man she could manipulate. She had no idea about the legal protections Harold and I had put in place years ago, or about Section 8.3 of the family trust. Nathan looked at me with worry in his eyes. "Grandpa, what are you going to do?" The next few weeks became a chess game. Irene escalated her pressure tactics while I quietly gathered evidence. She'd call every day with new concerns about my health, my safety, my ability to live alone. Each conversation was recorded. She brought a doctor to my house, another friend of Trevor's, who suggested I might be showing early signs of cognitive decline. When I refused to sign medical releases giving Irene access to my health records, she became agitated. "Dad, this is for your own protection," she said. "What if you have an emergency and we can't access your medical information?" But I could see through her strategy now. Irene was building a legal case for guardianship, which would give her complete control over my finances. Once she had that power, the house would be hers. The pressure reached a breaking point when she showed up with a moving company estimate. "Dad, I found you a lovely assisted living facility, much safer than this big house. The movers can pack everything next week." I never asked for a moving company. "Dad, we discussed this. You agreed it was time." More gaslighting, more manipulation. But I remained calm, because I knew something Irene didn't. Harold had been busy. We'd filed preliminary paperwork with the court documenting Irene's harassment. We'd reported the identity theft to the credit agencies and local police. And most importantly, we'd triggered an investigation of her law practices' client accounts. Irene was so focused on stealing my house that she didn't notice the legal noose tightening around her own neck. Then Irene made her final, fatal mistake. She scheduled a family dinner for Father's Day, with what she thought would be friendly witnesses to pressure me into signing the deed transfer. "Dad, we're having everyone over on Sunday," she announced. "Jenny, Nathan, the Hendersons from next door. We want to celebrate you and discuss some important family matters." The way she said important family matters made my skin crawl. But I agreed to come because I knew this would be my chance to let her hang herself with her own words. Harold had prepared a folder of documents, not the deed transfer Irene expected, but something else entirely, something that would destroy her plans completely. "Eddie," Harold said during our final meeting before Father's Day, "she's going to demand you sign those papers in front of witnesses, thinking the social pressure will force your hand. Let her make the demands. Let her threaten you publicly. Every word will be recorded, and every word will be evidence of elder abuse." I spent that Saturday evening in my quiet house, thinking about the daughter I'd raised with so much love and hope. The brilliant 8-year-old who'd promised to make me proud had become a woman willing to steal from her own father and gaslight him into questioning his sanity. But sometimes love means setting boundaries. Sometimes love means letting someone face the consequences of their choices. I tucked the manila folder under my arm and prepared for war. Irene had no idea what was coming. Father's Day arrived with the kind of humid Virginia heat that makes your shirt stick to your back. I drove to Irene's house in my old Honda, the manila folder on the passenger seat, my phone recording in my pocket. My hands weren't shaking anymore. I felt calm, focused, ready. Irene had set up a beautiful dinner in her backyard. White tablecloth, flowers from her garden, my favorite barbecue ribs. Jenny was there with her kids. Nathan was helping serve drinks, and the Henderson couple from my street sat at the far end looking uncomfortable. Everything looked perfect for a family celebration. But I could see the tension in Irene's shoulders, the way Trevor kept checking his phone, the stack of legal documents sitting conspicuously on the side table. This wasn't a Father's Day dinner. This was an ambush. "Dad!" Irene embraced me with theatrical warmth. "I'm so glad you're here. We have such exciting news to share with everyone." She guided me to the head of the table, where a plate was set but no chair was pulled out. A small detail, but I noticed. She wanted me standing, vulnerable, when she made her demands. Jenny looked confused. "What kind of news?" "Well," Irene said, her voice carrying across the yard, "Trevor and I have been working with Dad on some estate planning. We think it's time for him to make some smart financial decisions while he's still—" She paused for effect. "While he's still able to make them clearly." The Henderson couple shifted uncomfortably. Nathan stared at his plate. Jenny frowned. "Irene," I said quietly, "maybe this is something we should discuss privately." "Oh no, Dad. Family decisions should involve family. That's why everyone's here." She walked over to the side table and picked up the legal documents. I could see the deed transfer paperwork on top, already filled out with Irene's name as the new owner. Irene returned to the table holding the documents like a weapon. The afternoon sun cast harsh shadows across her face, and for a moment she looked like a stranger. My chest felt tight, but I kept my expression neutral. "Dad, as I was saying, we've prepared some paperwork that will protect your assets and make everyone's lives easier." She spread the documents across the table, right over our plates of food. "This deed transfer will put the house in my name, which eliminates any future complications." The Henderson couple exchanged glances. Mrs. Henderson started to speak, but Irene cut her off. "Mr. and Mrs. Henderson, as Dad's neighbors, you've probably noticed he's been having some difficulties maintaining the property. This arrangement ensures the house stays in the family while relieving him of the burden." Jenny finally found her voice. "Irene, what are you talking about? Dad's house is fine and he's perfectly capable of—" "Jenny, you don't visit as often as Trevor and I do. You haven't seen the signs." Irene's tone was patronizing, practiced. "The forgetfulness, the bills piling up, the way he gets confused about conversations we've had." Every word was calculated to make me seem incompetent in front of witnesses. But what Irene didn't know was that I'd been recording every one of our conversations she was referencing. Every lie could be proven false. "Irene," I said calmly, "I think you're misremembering some things. Dad, this is exactly what I'm talking about." She turned to the table with mock concern. "He's been getting more confused lately. That's why we need to handle this transfer now, while he can still sign his name." Nathan looked sick. Jenny was starting to understand what was happening. The Hendersons looked like they wanted to leave. But Irene wasn't done. She pulled out a pen and held it toward me. "Dad, just sign here and we can enjoy our dinner." I looked at the pen in Irene's outstretched hand. The whole table was watching me. The silence stretched out until I could hear the neighbor's lawnmower 3 houses down, the buzz of cicadas in the oak trees, my own heartbeat in my ears. Then I started to smile. "Irene," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the yard, "there's something you don't understand about that house." Her confident expression faltered slightly. "What do you mean?" I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the manila folder Harold had prepared. "I mean, you can't transfer what I don't actually own." "Dad, you're confused again. Of course you own the house." "No, sweetheart. The house belongs to the Sullivan Family Trust. I'm the trustee, not the owner. There's a significant difference." Irene's face went pale, but she recovered quickly. "Well, as trustee, you can still authorize the transfer." "Actually, I can't." I opened the folder and pulled out the trust documents. "Not without violating my fiduciary duty to the beneficiaries." Trevor leaned forward, his face flushed. "What beneficiaries?" I looked directly at Nathan, who was staring at me with growing understanding. "Nathan becomes the primary beneficiary when he turns 21. But there's something else you should know about this trust." Irene grabbed the papers from my hands, scanning them frantically. I could see her eyes searching for loopholes, escape clauses, any way to maintain control. "There's a provision," I continued, my voice steady and clear, "called Section 8.3. It states that any beneficiary who acts against the truster's interests forfeits their inheritance rights." The color drained completely from Irene's face. Jenny was reading over her shoulder now, her mouth falling open as she understood the implications. "What qualifies as acting against your interests?" Mrs. Henderson asked quietly. I smiled wider. "Identity theft, financial exploitation, attempting to coerce the truster into signing over assets." Irene's hands were shaking now as she rifled through the trust documents. "This is ridiculous, Dad. I haven't done anything wrong. I've been trying to help you." I reached into my other pocket and pulled out my phone. With a few taps, I started playing one of the recorded conversations from the previous week. Irene's voice filled the backyard. "Dad, you're 72. It's normal to forget conversations. That's why Trevor and I think it might be time to discuss your living situation." Then my voice. "Irene, I never agreed to co-sign for any credit cards." "Dad, we discussed this months ago. You offered to help us with credit building, remember? You're getting forgetful." I stopped the recording. The silence was deafening. Jenny was staring at her sister in horror. "Irene, did you open credit cards in Dad's name?" "It's not what it sounds like," Irene said, but her voice was shaking now. "Dad agreed to help us build credit." I pulled out the credit report from my folder. $38,500 in debt. 4 cards I never applied for. All used to fund Trevor's gambling and your shopping. I handed the papers to Jenny. Trevor stood up abruptly, knocking over his chair. "We need to go." But Irene wasn't ready to retreat. This was her last chance, and she knew it. Her desperate mask finally slipped completely. "Fine!" she screamed, loud enough that other neighbors turned to look. "You want to be a stubborn, selfish old man? You want to live in that big house all alone while your family struggles?" She swept her arm across the table, sending plates crashing to the ground. "Here's the deal, Dad. Sign over the house today, right now, or you're not welcome in this family anymore. No more Father's Days, no more holidays, no more contact with your grandson." She stood over me, holding the pen like a knife. "Choose, the house or your family." But there was something Irene still didn't know. That night I sat in my quiet kitchen with a cup of tea, processing what had happened. Irene's ultimatum still echoed in my head. The house or your family? As if love was something that could be negotiated, bought, and sold like property. My chest ached, but not from anger anymore. From grief. I was grieving the daughter I thought I'd raised. The little girl who used to climb into my lap and ask me to read her stories. The teenager who called me from college just to hear my voice. Somewhere along the way, that person had been replaced by someone I didn't recognize. But sitting there in the darkness, I remembered something Margaret used to say when Irene was small and threw tantrums to get her way. Eddie, giving in to manipulation isn't love, it's enabling. Real love sometimes means letting people face consequences. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Harold Davidson's number. Even though it was late, I knew he'd want to hear about what happened at dinner. "Eddie," Harold answered on the second ring. "How did it go?" She made the demands publicly, just like you predicted. Threatened to cut off family contact if I didn't sign. All of it recorded. Perfect. That gives us everything we need for the elder abuse claim. The credit fraud, the coercion, the threats, it's all documented now. I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Relief. Not because I was getting revenge, but because I was finally protecting myself. "Harold," I said, "what's our next move?" "Tomorrow morning, we file everything. Police report for the identity theft, complaint with the state bar about her ethics violations, and formal notification that she's triggered the trust's forfeiture clause." I slept better that night than I had in months. No more wondering if I was being paranoid. No more questioning my own memory. Irene had shown her true nature in front of witnesses, and now I could act. Harold met me at his office early Monday morning with a stack of paperwork already prepared. "Eddie, before we file these complaints, I want to make sure you understand what happens next. This isn't just about protecting your assets anymore. Irene could face serious legal consequences." "What kind of consequences?" "Criminal charges for identity theft and elder abuse, suspension or revocation of her law license. If she's been using client funds to pay personal debts, which my investigation suggests she has, she could face embezzlement charges." Harold spread the documents across his desk. Police report. Complaint to the Virginia State Bar. Formal notice to Irene that she'd violated Section 8.3 of the trust. Cease and desist letter, demanding she stop all contact regarding my finances. Are you ready for this, Eddie? Once we file these papers, there's no going back. I thought about Nathan, 19 years old, and watching his mother threaten his grandfather for money. I thought about other elderly parents dealing with similar manipulation from their own children. I thought about Margaret, and how disappointed she'd be if I let Irene's behavior continue unchecked. Harold, she made her choice when she decided to steal from me and gaslight me about it. "I'm just enforcing boundaries." We spent an hour reviewing each document, making sure every detail was accurate. The evidence was overwhelming. Recorded conversations, bank statements, credit reports, witness testimony from yesterday's dinner. "The first call will probably come around noon," Harold warned as I signed the last form. He was right. My phone rang at 12:17 p.m. The call came while I was eating lunch. Irene's name flashed on my screen, but when I answered, it was Trevor's voice, panicked and angry. "What did you do, you crazy old man? The police just called Irene about identity theft charges." I stayed calm, taking a sip of my iced tea. "I reported crimes that were committed against me, Trevor. What did you think would happen?" "This is insane. Irene was just trying to help you with estate planning." $38,500 in fraudulent debt isn't estate planning, Trevor. It's felony theft. The line went quiet for a moment. Then Irene's voice came through, shaky and desperate. "Dad, please, can we talk about this? I think there's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding, Irene. You stole my identity, manipulated me, threatened me, and tried to coerce me into signing over my house. All of it is documented." "Dad, I was just trying to protect the family assets." "By stealing them?" Another long pause. When she spoke again, her voice was different, smaller. For the first time in years, she sounded like my little girl again. "Dad, please. Trevor owes some very dangerous people money. We're desperate. Can't we work something out?" And there it was. The truth finally. Not concern for my well-being, not love, not family loyalty, just desperation and greed. "Irene," I said gently, "I love you. I always will. But I can't enable your husband's gambling addiction or your willingness to steal from me to fund it. So what happens now? Now you face the consequences of your choices, just like I taught you when you were 8 years old. I hung up the phone and sat in the quiet of my kitchen, feeling something I hadn't felt in months: peace. By Wednesday morning, the legal machinery was in full motion. Harold called me at 8 a.m. with updates. "Eddie, the police have opened a formal investigation into the identity theft. Irene's been asked to come in for questioning tomorrow." "What about the credit cards?" "All 4 have been flagged as fraudulent. The credit card companies are pursuing full restitution. Irene will have to pay back every penny, plus penalties and legal fees." But that was just the beginning. Harold had discovered that Irene's legal troubles went far deeper than stealing from me. "The state bar is launching an ethics investigation based on our complaint. But here's the bigger problem. Their accountant called this morning. They want to know why client retainer funds have been moved to personal accounts." My stomach dropped. "She's been stealing from clients too?" "It looks that way. Trevor's gambling debts were larger than we thought. Irene apparently used client money to make emergency payments to loan sharks." The irony was staggering. Irene was a lawyer, trained to understand the consequences of financial crimes, yet she'd committed multiple felonies to enable her husband's addiction. "Harold, what happens to Nathan in all this?" "That's actually some good news. I spoke with him yesterday. He's moving out of their house, coming to stay with Jenny temporarily. He wants nothing to do with his parents' criminal activity." I felt a wave of relief. Nathan was a good kid who deserved better than parents who'd steal from family members and clients. "Eddie, there's one more thing. Irene's law office has been sealed pending investigation. Her practice is effectively finished. Through my kitchen window, I could see Rita Morrison working in her garden. She waved, and I waved back. Life was continuing normally for everyone else, while Irene's world was collapsing around her. But she'd built that collapse herself, one lie and one theft at a time. Thursday afternoon, my phone started ringing non-stop. Irene, Trevor, even some of their friends calling to plead Irene's case. I let them all go to voicemail. But the most interesting call came from Nathan. "Grandpa, can I come over? There's something I need to tell you." An hour later, Nathan sat across from me at my kitchen table, looking older than his 19 years. He had a manila folder of his own. "Grandpa, I've been documenting Mom and Dad's fights for months. I knew something was wrong when they kept talking about money they didn't have." He opened his folder and pulled out bank statements, credit card bills, even printed emails between Irene and Trevor. "Dad owes money to 3 different loan sharks, not just one. The total debt is over $200,000. And Mom's been stealing from her clients for 8 months. Nathan showed me email exchanges where Irene discussed moving money from client escrow accounts to cover temporary emergencies. She'd convinced herself it was borrowing, not stealing, because she intended to pay it back. "But here's the thing that really scared me," Nathan continued. "They were planning to take out a reverse mortgage on your house once they got control of it. They'd already met with 3 different companies. A reverse mortgage would have allowed them to borrow against the house's value while I was still living in it. But when I died, the house would belong to the bank, not the family. They were going to steal my inheritance too," Nathan said quietly, "and leave you homeless if you couldn't make the payments." I reached across the table and squeezed my grandson's hand. "Nathan, you understand why I had to stop them, right?" "Grandpa, I'm proud of you for fighting back. Someone had to protect you from them." The relief in his voice told me everything I needed to know. I wasn't just protecting myself. I was protecting Nathan's future too. Friday morning brought the news I'd been expecting. Harold called with a tone I'd never heard from him before. Grim satisfaction mixed with genuine sadness. "Eddie, the state bar has suspended Irene's license pending criminal charges. The client trust account investigation found $67,000 in missing funds." $67,000. Irene had stolen more from her clients than she'd stolen from me. "What about the house situation?" "That's where things get interesting. I spoke with the trust administrator this morning. Based on Irene's documented financial exploitation and coercion, Section 8.3 has been formally triggered. She's lost all inheritance rights." I felt my shoulders relax for the first time in months. "And Nathan?" "Nathan becomes the primary beneficiary immediately 2 years ahead of schedule due to the circumstances. The house is essentially his now, though he's asked that you remain as trustee until he graduates college." My grandson was wiser than his mother had ever been. He understood that ownership and control were different things, but Harold had more news. Eddie, there's something else. The FBI is getting involved. The FBI? Irene's client theft triggered federal wire fraud charges because she moved money across state lines through electronic transfers. Trevor's gambling debts involve organized crime. This is bigger than just family financial abuse now. I sat down heavily in my kitchen chair. When I'd first called Harold about protecting myself from Irene's manipulation, I never imagined it would lead to federal criminal charges. Harold, am I doing the right thing? She's still my daughter. Eddie, you didn't create this situation. Irene did. You're just refusing to be victimized by it. And by stopping her now, you may be saving her from worse consequences down the road. Through my window, I could see Jenny's car pulling into my driveway. She'd been checking on me daily since the Father's Day confrontation. At least one of my daughters still knew how to love without conditions. Jenny sat with me in the living room that afternoon, both of us processing the magnitude of what Irene had done. My older daughter's face was a mixture of anger and grief. Dad, I had no idea how bad things had gotten, Jenny said. I knew Irene was struggling financially, but I never imagined she'd steal from you. She didn't start out intending to steal, I said. It probably began as borrowing that she convinced herself she'd pay back. Jenny shook her head. Dad, don't make excuses for her. What she did was calculated. The fake experts, the gaslighting, the public ultimatum, that wasn't desperation. That was manipulation. She was right. Irene hadn't made impulsive mistakes. She'd crafted a systematic plan to take control of my assets while making me doubt my own mental capacity. Nathan called me this morning, Jenny continued. He told me about the trust, about how Irene loses her inheritance. Dad, I want you to know, I support your decision completely. Relief flooded through me. I'd been worried that protecting myself would divide my family, but it was doing the opposite. The people who truly love me were rallying around me. Jenny, there's something I need to tell you about the trust provisions. I explained how the trust worked, how Nathan would inherit most of the assets, but how provisions existed for emergency support for other family members who proved themselves trustworthy. I'm not cutting Irene out because I don't love her, I said. I'm cutting her out because enabling her was destroying both of us. Jenny nodded. Dad, you raised us to believe that actions have consequences. Irene's actions have consequences. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. This isn't over, old man. You'll regret destroying our family. I showed the message to Jenny, who immediately called Harold Davidson. Apparently, Irene still didn't understand that she'd destroyed the family herself. The threatening text message was Irene's final mistake. Harold immediately forwarded it to the police investigating the identity theft charges, and it became evidence of witness intimidation and elder harassment. Eddie, this text actually helps us, Harold explained during an emergency phone meeting. It shows a pattern of escalating threats and proves Irene hasn't accepted responsibility for her actions. By Monday morning, Irene had been arrested on federal charges: wire fraud, identity theft, elder abuse, and now witness intimidation. Trevor was arrested the same day for conspiracy and money laundering. Nathan called me that afternoon, his voice hollow with exhaustion. Grandpa, they arrested Mom this morning. She's in federal custody. I'm sorry, Nathan. I know this is hard for you. Grandpa, can I ask you something? Do you think Mom ever really loved us, or were we just resources to her? The question broke my heart. Nathan, your mother loves you in the only way she knows how, but somewhere along the way she started confusing love with control and need with entitlement. That evening, Jenny brought dinner over and we ate together in comfortable silence. The house felt peaceful for the first time in months. No more waiting for manipulative phone calls. No more questioning my own memories. No more fear of being forced from my home. Dad, Jenny said as she cleared the dishes, I'm proud of you. It took courage to stand up to Irene. Sometimes protecting yourself is the most loving thing you can do, I replied, for everyone involved. Harold called later with final details. Irene's law license had been permanently revoked. She faced 5 to 10 years in federal prison. All the fraudulent debt would be removed from my credit report. The trust was secure, with Nathan as the beneficiary. But the most important outcome wasn't legal or financial. It was the restoration of my dignity and peace of mind. 3 weeks after Irene's arrest, I made a decision that felt both necessary and heartbreaking.
I packed my clothes, my books, and a few precious mementos into boxes and prepared to move out of the house I'd called home for 32 years. Not because I was forced to leave, but because I chose to. Nathan had legally inherited the house, but he'd insisted I should continue living there as long as I wanted. "Grandpa, it's your home. I don't need a house while I'm in college." But the house held too many painful memories now. Every room reminded me of Irene's visits, her manipulation, her attempts to steal from me.
I needed a fresh start somewhere I could heal.
Jenny helped me pack, carefully wrapping the photo albums in Margaret's dishes. "Dad, are you sure about this? Nathan really wants you to stay." "I know he does, and I love him for it. But I need to live somewhere that feels like mine again, not somewhere I'm staying as a guest in my own former home." I'd found a small but beautiful apartment in a senior community 20 minutes away. It had a garden view, a full kitchen, and most importantly, it belonged to me alone. No trust documents, no complicated ownership structures, just a simple lease in my name. Nathan came over on moving day to help load boxes. "Grandpa, this feels wrong. You shouldn't have to leave your house because of what Mom did." "Nathan, I'm not leaving because of what your mother did. I'm leaving because I choose to start fresh. There's a difference." As I took one last walk through the empty rooms, I felt something unexpected. Gratitude.
This house had sheltered my family for decades, but it had also become a symbol of Irene's greed. Now it could become Nathan's foundation for building something better. Rita Morrison stood on her front porch as the moving truck pulled away. She waved goodbye with tears in her eyes. I waved back and drove toward my new beginning. My new apartment felt like freedom, small, manageable, and entirely mine. No maintenance issues, no property taxes to worry about, no memories of family betrayal lurking in every corner. Jenny visited twice a week, helping me settle in and adjust to the new space. Nathan came by every Sunday, often bringing homework to work on while we talked. Both of them seemed relieved to see me relaxed and peaceful again. But Irene wasn't ready to accept the consequences of her actions. Letters started arriving at my new address. She'd somehow discovered where I'd moved. Not threatening letters like the text message, but manipulative ones designed to make me feel guilty. "Dad, I know I made mistakes, but I'm still your daughter. How can you abandon family over money? Mom would be so disappointed in how you're treating me." Each letter contained the same emotional manipulation tactics she'd used in person. Guilt about Margaret, accusations that I was choosing money over family, claims that she was the real victim. I read them all, then filed them away as evidence. Harold had warned me that Irene might try to establish a paper trail suggesting I was the unreasonable one, preparing for an eventual appeal or lawsuit. But the letter that surprised me came from Trevor, writing from federal prison. "Mr. Sullivan, I owe you an apology. Irene and I let gambling addiction and greed destroy our judgment. You were right to protect yourself from us. I'm in therapy now, working on addiction issues, and I wanted you to know that what we did was wrong. Irene struggles to accept responsibility, but I know we caused this situation ourselves." I read Trevor's letter 3 times, looking for manipulation or hidden agendas. But it seemed genuine. The first honest communication I'd received from either of them in months. I wrote back a brief note. "Trevor, I appreciate your honesty. Focus on your recovery and being the father Nathan deserves when you get out. Sometimes accountability comes from unexpected sources." Irene's manipulation attempts escalated when the letters didn't work. She managed to get my new phone number and called repeatedly, sometimes crying, sometimes angry, always trying to find an emotional leverage point. "Dad, I'm your daughter. How can you choose money over family?" "Irene, I didn't choose money over family. You did. That's not fair. I was trying to protect our family's financial future." "By stealing from me and gaslighting me about it?" She'd hang up, then call back an hour later with a different emotional approach. Guilt, anger, victimhood, false promises. Irene cycled through every manipulation technique in her arsenal, but I'd learned to recognize the patterns. After months of therapy sessions with a counselor who specialized in elder abuse, I could see Irene's tactics clearly. She was trying to rewrite history, making herself the victim and me the unreasonable aggressor. "Dad, I've been thinking about this situation, and I realize we both made mistakes. Maybe we can work something out. I could pay back some of the money over time." "Irene, You stole $38,500 from me, threatened me publicly, and used my identity to fund Trevor's gambling. There's no working something out. But, Dad, I'm facing serious prison time. Don't you care about that? And there was the core of her manipulation, the expectation that my love for her should override my need for self-protection. She genuinely believed that being my daughter entitled her to steal from me without consequences. Irene, I care about you very much. That's why I'm not enabling your behavior anymore. This isn't love, Dad. This is cruel revenge. No, sweetheart. Cruel revenge would be not reporting the crimes until after you'd stolen everything I had. Love means setting boundaries before it's too late for both of us. She hung up on me for the last time. Nathan called later that evening to check on me. Grandpa, Mom called me crying about how you won't forgive her. She asked me to talk to you. What did you tell her? I told her that forgiveness and trust are different things, and that actions have consequences. My grandson was wiser than his mother would ever be. 6 months later, Irene's world had completely collapsed, just as Harold had predicted. The federal charges resulted in a plea bargain, 3 years in federal prison, full restitution to all victims, and permanent disbarment. Jenny called me the day Irene was sentenced. Dad, she got 3 years. The judge said her abuse of professional trust and exploitation of elderly family made the crimes particularly serious. I felt a complex mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness for the daughter I'd lost, relief that the legal proceedings were finally over. But Irene's personal consequences extended far beyond prison. Trevor had already been sentenced to 2 years for money laundering and conspiracy. Their house went into foreclosure. Their few remaining friends abandoned them once the details of their crimes became public. Nathan transferred schools to get away from the scandal surrounding his parents' arrests. He'd changed his name legally, dropping the Bennett surname and taking Sullivan instead. I want to be associated with your values, not theirs, he told me. The saddest part was watching Irene's complete inability to accept responsibility, even after conviction. Jenny had visited her once in prison and reported that Irene still claimed she'd been trying to help, and that I was overreacting to her attempts at estate planning. She actually told me that you'll regret this when you're older and need family support, Jenny said. She still doesn't understand that she destroyed our family's trust herself. Irene had convinced herself that she was the victim of my cruelty, rather than the perpetrator of systematic financial abuse. Even facing 3 years in federal prison, she maintained that her intentions had been good. But intentions don't matter when the actions cause real harm to real people. Some lessons can only be learned through consequences, and Irene had chosen to learn them the hard way. The hardest part wasn't Irene's imprisonment or the loss of our relationship. The hardest part was watching her remain fundamentally unchanged by the experience of consequences. During her trial, Irene's defense attorney tried to paint her as a devoted daughter who'd made poor financial decisions under pressure. She testified that she'd only wanted to protect the family assets and help me with complicated estate planning. Even under oath, she couldn't admit that she'd systematically stolen from me, gaslighted me, and threatened me when I refused to comply with her demands. The prosecutor played recordings of our conversations, showing the jury clear evidence of manipulation and threats. Irene listened to her own voice saying, "You're getting forgetful, and maybe we should discuss your living situation." But she showed no signs of recognition or remorse. When the judge asked if she had anything to say before sentencing, Irene gave a speech about how much she loved me and how she couldn't understand why I'd chosen to destroy our family over money. Even then, facing federal prison, she portrayed herself as the victim. Nathan attended the sentencing hearing with me. Afterward, as we walked to the parking garage, he said something that stayed with me. "Grandpa, I used to think Mom was just making bad choices because of stress, but listening to her testimony today, I realize she genuinely believes her own lies. She's convinced herself that you're the bad guy in this story." That night, I sat in my apartment looking through old photo albums. Pictures of Irene as a child, graduation photos, family holidays. Somewhere in those images was the daughter I thought I'd raised, before greed and entitlement consumed her capacity for honesty and self-reflection. I grieved for that lost daughter while feeling grateful that I'd finally protected myself from the person she'd become. A year after Irene's sentencing, I received one final letter from her. It arrived on what would have been Margaret's 72nd birthday, which felt like deliberate manipulation of the date's emotional significance. The letter was different from her previous attempts at contact, longer, more thoughtful, less obviously manipulative. For a moment, I hoped it might represent genuine growth and accountability. "Dad," it began, "I've had a year to think about what happened between us, and I want you to know that I understand you felt you had no choice but to report me to the authorities." My heart lifted slightly. Finally, some acknowledgement of her actions, but as I continued reading, the familiar patterns emerged. Irene acknowledged my feelings while avoiding responsibility for creating the situation that generated those feelings. She expressed regret for how things turned out while maintaining that her intentions had been good. The closest she came to an apology was, "I'm sorry that my attempts to help our family's financial situation made you feel threatened and manipulated." Even after a year in federal prison, Irene couldn't say, "I'm sorry I stole from you," or "I'm sorry I threatened you," or "I was wrong." She was sorry that I felt threatened, as if my reaction had been unreasonable rather than her actions being criminal. The letter ended with a request. "Dad, I hope that when I get out we can find a way to rebuild our relationship. I love you, and I believe family should forgive family." I read the letter 3 times, looking for any sign of genuine accountability or change. I found none. I wrote a brief response. "Irene, I love you, and I forgive you. But love and forgiveness don't erase consequences or rebuild trust. I hope prison gives you time to develop genuine insight into your choices." I mailed the letter and filed Irene's correspondence away. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. 2 years later, I sat in my garden apartment watching Nathan graduate from college with honors. He'd chosen to major in social work, inspired by his experience with family dysfunction. "I want to help families communicate better before they reach the breaking point," he told me. After graduation, Nathan and I went to Harold Davidson's office to finalize the trust transition. At 23, Nathan was ready to take full control of his inheritance. The house on Maple Street had been his legal property for 2 years, but he'd let Jenny manage it while he finished school. "Grandpa," Nathan said as Harold prepared the final paperwork, "I want to do something with the house that would honor your values." He'd decided to convert it into transitional housing for elderly people escaping financial abuse from family members. "There are other people going through what you went through. They need somewhere safe to live while they rebuild their independence." I felt tears in my eyes. My grandson had taken the pain of his family's dysfunction and transformed it into something that could help others. Harold handed me a manila folder, not the blue one that had saved my dignity 2 years earlier, but a new one containing the final trust documents. "Eddie," Harold said, "you should be proud. You protected yourself, you protected Nathan's future, and you held Irene accountable for her actions. That took tremendous courage." Later that evening, I called Jenny to tell her about Nathan's plans for the house. "Dad, that's perfect," she said. "You turned a symbol of Irene's greed into something that helps other people protect themselves." As I hung up the phone, I thought about Margaret and the values she'd taught our children. Nathan had learned them. Jenny had learned them. Irene had rejected them. But 2 out of 3 wasn't a failure. It was a legacy worth preserving. Real children don't make their parents choose between dignity and relationship. When they do, the choice is already made for you.